This is the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, Show 85, our experience working with a marriage counselor. Are you frustrated by a lack of momentum in your business? Tired of putting in long hours doing what everyone says you should and still not making money? Sounds like you're ready for Lifestyle Builders. We'll help you get back on track, taking action, and seeing results. Head over to joinlifestylebuilders.com today to get started. All right. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to talk about this topic today because I think it's a really taboo subject.
I agree. And it's, as we'll get into in a little bit, it's had just such a huge impact. And I'm excited to share kind of our experiences as well as, the benefits that I think people can see from going through it.
But first, pop quiz.
Uh-oh.
Not really a pop quiz. What was your favorite part of our wedding, which was 10 years ago now?
I would say probably the anticipation and the buildup, not like the months of planning, but like that day while I was waiting for like you to come out, like it was just so exciting and almost surreal. And then like obviously not seeing you all day and then you coming out. One, you looked absolutely beautiful. And two, that was like the moment where even though we had like hundreds of people in the room, like it was literally just you and I, like that was all I could focus on. And then, I really didn't see you much of the rest of the night because we were kind of pulled out everywhere else. But like in that moment, it was just amazing.
That was a pretty amazing moment. I'll give it to you. And I love how you say not the months of planning. Yeah, because you did absolutely none of that.
Oh, it was terrible.
I think that there were a lot of good moments. I think one of my favorite moments was actually the like end of the night where, you know how when you're at parties with like really loud music and it's on for a really long time, you get that weird thing in your ears where all the sounds are coming in through like a screen and everything is just very muffled. And because we had been going all day long, like I was just so beyond exhausted, but it was just like euphoria. Like I just remember sitting like across multiple chairs with no shoes on. All the people that we loved were still kind of gathered around us as they helped us like pick up to get ready to go back home. And I just remember just sitting there just like, like that was what we were waiting for, the party.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So to dive back into this topic a little bit, this is an area where we've seen quite a bit that it's kind of hush-hush talked about, or it's looked down upon to talk about it, or people judge you because you're going to a marriage counselor or a marriage therapist.
Well, here's the funniest thing. We talk about it. It's so taboo to like go to a marriage counselor. And like, if you go to it, like you said, it's kind of hush hush and people will judge you. This is like the only space where people will judge you for seeking help to make things better. Like we are business coaches. People come to us if they want to have a better business. If you look at your favorite athlete, they have a coach to help them get to the next level.
Some of them have multiple coaches.
Yeah. If you look at kind of any area, when people want to get better, they invest in themselves with books, with coaches, with whatever makes sense. And yet, one of the most important areas of your life, which is your marriage and your relationship, we're just supposed to like know how to do it. And we're not supposed to get any help with that. And I'm going to call BS because one, this is something that we've talked about doing for a long time. Now it took us, to be honest, a couple of years to actually pull the trigger and do it. But once we did, it was the best thing ever because, and our therapist, when we talked to her the first time, she goes, you know what? You guys are doing this right. She said, most people wait until like things are terrible. And then it's so much more difficult to kind of come back from that. And you guys have a good relationship. She's like, yeah, there's opportunities for improvement, but you guys are doing it at the right time because you're coming to say, how do I make my relationship better? Not like at the end to say, how do I save my relationship?
Well, and I think we talked about this with Stacy and Paul a little bit. We all take love for granted. We think that all you need is love. All you need is love.
I didn't even throw the song out that time.
I had to. We think that that's all you need for a successful relationship and a successful marriage. And it's not true. You need to be putting the work in. You need to be setting aside the time. You need to be dedicating yourself to making the relationship better, to showing up, to becoming a better person. And I think because we just assume that when we find love and we get married, that everything's just going to work itself out. And then we have all of these things in our lives that are constantly tearing that down or constantly taking time away from our relationship.
Yeah.
So then it starts to suffer. And we just, we keep taking it for granted. Well, we love each other and it'll be fine. It'll work itself out. It does not work that way. Like over time, you will start to drift apart. You will start to see things differently. You will start to resent each other for different reasons. And a lot of us are not very good at confrontation with the person that we love. No one wants to, well, some people like getting into arguments, but no one really wants to have those deep, hurtful conversations with their significant other, but we often let it get to the point where that's what has to happen.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. So a lot of this too is more about giving yourselves the tools and the understanding so that you never get to that point. If you truly understand how to raise concerns, how to have constructive conversations, and how to broach subjects that may not be pleasant, but you understand and have the tools to do that on a consistent basis, now you're not like avoiding it until it becomes a big thing and then turns into a really big issue. So I think a lot of it's just really giving you more clarity and then giving you the tools and having a third-party person to give you some of that outside feedback as well.
Yeah. We've talked about this in business many times. It is very hard to look at something that you're very close to and see the gaps or the holes or the issues. It's the same thing for your relationship. Sometimes you're so close to it, you're in it. It is impossible to see where the miscommunications are happening or where the issues are popping up between the two of you to even attempt to start to fix things.
Yep.
So that third party person is really helpful to have there, somebody who understands kind of where you and your spouse are coming from and what you're doing now and can kind of give you that overview or that bigger perspective of, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Maybe we can dive in here and start to work on things.
Well, and I'll tell you, so like going back to business, a lot of what I do or have done in the past is actually work with business leaders to help them facilitate their planning process. And so it's not that they couldn't necessarily do it on their own, but what they found is that bringing in an outside party like myself to run that session, they all can focus on being in the session, and one of them doesn't have to focus on trying to lead it plus participate. And it's kind of the same thing with this. Like, let's say you have a tough conversation coming up or there's something you want to talk through. If you're the person trying to lead that conversation plus participate, it's challenging. And, sometimes you can't call out something in your partner the way a third party can, especially somebody that's an expert. Like, there were times, and we'll get into some of our lessons learned as we go forward on the show, but there were times where like we'd be talking through something and, she would notice something and she'd be like, all right, let's take a step back. Why did you say that thing? Or, hey, Ariana, what's going on right now? Like, I saw that you had an emotional reaction. So just being able to bring awareness to that then allowed us to kind of understand like what was going on and be able to have really good discussions, I think, coming out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the reasons that we ultimately chose to go, which Tom mentioned this a little bit, we talked about going 3 years ago. Back when we had our first podcast, we talked about like, we're going to go see a marriage therapist. We never did it. There wasn't any, I think because of the way society looks at marriage therapy, it's as if it isn't needed until something goes wrong or until something pops up. So I think we just kept saying, oh yeah, we're going to sign up. We're going to go see somebody. It wasn't front of mind and we didn't really think about it. So we didn't do it.
Well, and part of that too is, things get busy. And if you don't prioritize what's important, it's always going to fall to the wayside.
Yep.
And one of the reasons I think we finally went this year was that we set a theme to put us first.
Yep.
And that was put us first with our health, put us first with our relationship. And part of that was then obviously spending some time and some money to get some guidance and help with that.
Yeah. And I think as we have gone through different levels of business growth as well as different levels of parenting growth as our kids get older, we've gone through different challenges and different seasons, as you could say. And we finally hit a season where I was like, we're better than this. Our relationship is better than this, and we need to figure out how to get that back. And that was when we ultimately said, like, let's go talk to somebody. We used to be really good at communicating, and now we're having all these communication breakdowns. Like, what is happening? So we seeked out a third party. She is amazing. And we were able to kind of talk about, hey, each of us as an individual, we came together with 18 years of life and experiences behind us. And then on top of that, we've now been together for 16 years. We met when we were 18. So like we had our previous life experiences, then we had all of our growth together, and all of that has kind of melded each of us into these different selves.
Well, and I'll tell you, like, to be honest, our first 4 years, even probably beyond that, were pretty easy. Like, we legit didn't fight.
No.
And ironically, it probably hurt us because we never kind of figured out how to.
We never figured out how to fight.
Yeah. It sounds weird. But I mean, like, it was the two of us. We were through college. We were kind of on our own after that. And it wasn't until these different life challenges kept piling on and I didn't even realize it until I think this year, that we had drifted apart and we had both grown and faced different challenges, and we weren't nearly as connected as we were before. Like, I mean, like, legit in college, we used to just sit up like all night, like, just talking about random stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think we knew each other really well. And then, it got to where we were doing the businesses. We had our first child. I was traveling for work. We had our second child. And we got to a point where I was away more than I was home. And you were with the kids, like, there was probably some postpartum depression after, like, our second child. Our son wasn't sleeping. So there was just a lot of stuff that has gone up. And early on, sure, like, love got us through because it was pretty easy. Mm-hmm. But once, like, life started coming in, we didn't take direct action to make sure that, like, we were first and we were solid.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was huge. We decided we were going to take us first this year. We were true to our word, finally.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you guys, like, what was cool about when we did the couples series and talked to every couple, one of the themes that came out was, like, put your marriage first. Like, this is more important than anything else. Like, whatever business you have now, it could come and go. Like, and if you don't believe me, go listen to some of the episodes. There were people that had $1 million businesses that went bankrupt. There were people that business was going well for a long time and then it dropped out. And then they built another business and then it dropped out. But the consistency, the thing that matters is this. Mm-hmm. And this should last all of that stuff. And the last thing you want to have happen is to have a business issue come up and then derail and cause issues here.
Yeah. Especially if you have, more members in your family as well. If you have kids or if you're taking care of other people, that adds another layer of complexity to things. And, it just makes it harder to prioritize things. So you have to be really, really intentional about it.
Yeah. And, I haven't really shared, I don't think I've shared this on the podcast, but we've coached entrepreneurs. I've worked with leaders for a long time. And, we've had some actually, challenges kind of figuring out, like, who it was we ultimately wanted to work with. And part of how we came to be on Lifestyle Builders was I'd had a client that came for business help. And, they were in debt and I was helping them with the business. And we saw some marital issues going on. Not that we're experts, but we saw, like, hey, you guys have to communicate better. Here's some of the things we've used. And it would probably be good to go see a marriage counselor. And I think they actually were at that point. Fast forward, we helped them achieve really good success in business. They ultimately sold more than $1 million in revenue in 1 year. And that's incredible. They were also able to experience some of their dreams. But shortly after coaching got done, we found out that they were ultimately getting divorced. And that really impacted me. And it was almost like, what's the point of building businesses ourselves or helping other people build businesses if the life and the marriage and all of that kind of comes crumbling down as a result of that? Mm-hmm. So for us, it's so important to make sure that you're not just building your business, but you're building it in support of your life. And if it's going to take away from your life, then you really got to take a step back and make sure that your life and why you're doing it is there and solid before you then spend the time on the business.
Yeah. So let's get into some real talk, because one thing that I have learned about marriage therapy, couples therapy, whatever you want to call it is a lot of self-work.
Deep work.
Deep self-work. Yeah. And I mean, most of us don't normally go through that just in general in life. I mean, it usually happens when something big has happened in your life and you have to do some of that deep work. Maybe you're somebody who's able to do that on your own, but most of us probably seek help from the outside somehow to do that. I think it's uncovered things that neither of us knew that we were even holding in. Because we've been together so long, I think some stuff has just gotten like put under the rug, or I don't know, just pushed off to the side, because it wasn't anything that was urgent or like a really big issue, but they were things that kind of were compounding in the background and adding to current issues, and we weren't realizing it. So going to couples therapy has really helped kind of uncover some of those and make us aware that they are there, so that we can kind of dive in a little bit and work on them, which again, a lot of work. So, I mean, once you've kind of figured out that these things are floating around in there, not only do you have to work on them, but, life is still happening. So it's really been important for us to take some time out to kind of assess those things and, look at, okay, well, we've got these things going on. How are we going to make sure we're making time for ourselves to kind of process or put new routines in place, or, do some of that work. So that has been something that's been really helpful, is putting aside that time, putting us first.
Yeah. Well, and, I think what's been interesting is what I noticed was we would get to a point, like, things would be good. Something would come up. We'd get to a point and we'd kind of get stuck and we wouldn't be able to get past it. And I know we would both get frustrated, and I'd get really frustrated because I'm like, why do we keep hitting this same point and kind of repeating this pattern that doesn't make either of us happy and doesn't get us to our goals?
Mm-hmm.
And what I think we ultimately found was that there was just some blocks and some fears and some stuff going on there that once we had awareness to that, then we could start working through and actually able to move past those points.
Well, and I think when you are going through, like, first of all, as the spouse who has the things uncovered, you didn't know they were there. You're just finding out about them. So you have to process that on your own time. As the spouse who just found out that their spouse has some things underlying, you also have to process those items, and then you have to figure out a way to work through them together. So I think that's been one of the biggest things, is now that we know about them, I'm learning ways to deal with some of my underlying fears and things, and you're learning ways to help me deal with those, or to at least not tiptoe around them, but to word things differently, or kind of know when things are getting close to that point, so that we can change the conversation and keep things productive rather than going through the cycle.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned fear a couple times, and this was a big one for us, like when you start a business, like, it is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, different people handle it in different ways, but my mentality was always, all right, we're going to go and do this. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We're going to learn and we're going to build from it. So I was always looking at, like, well, let's just try something, because if it works, great. If not, we're going to have more information to then build forward. So I always wanted to, like, fail on a small level so we wouldn't fail on a big level. What we kind of uncovered was that Ariana took a different view of fear and failure. Mm-hmm. And, like, she didn't want to do something unless she kind of knew she was going to be good at it. Because, like, looking at her background, she was really good at a lot of things and is really good at a lot of things. But what should have been kind of clear and it wasn't, was that, when you weren't good at something, you just didn't do it.
Yep.
So as we got into business, guess what? Entrepreneurship is this big land of, like, things you haven't done before.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of our big challenge was, I was just like, well, let's just go do it. What's the worst that could happen? And you're like, no, I want to make sure we understand and can be successful at it. Once we figure that out, then it was so much easier to have conversations and understand that that blocking point we got to, here's why it happened, and then here's ways for us to work past it so that that fear doesn't stop us from the greatness that we have and can share with people.
And this was something that we uncovered ultimately by talking about our pasts with a third party, because we would have never really picked up on that from each other. I don't think we've ever talked about even some of that stuff when we were younger, going through, like you talked about how you had gone through failure many times and you had done certain things where you got over the fear of failure very early. I did not. So we had very different upbringings and very different perspectives on those types of situations. So obviously over the years, that's compounded. So your fear of risk is like this big, and my fear of risk is like this big.
Well, and you know, I think one of the common misconceptions with therapy or with, you know, working with a counselor is that it takes a long time and you've got to go for years. I think we came to that conclusion after like our 4th session. And so like when we started going, even still now, we go once a month. So basically over the course of 4 months, we were able to get a lot of clarity into kind of what we were each thinking, what some of our sticking points were, and then get some really good practices to then support and kind of help us work through those things.
Yeah, and I think we've each gotten a much better understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And how we approach problems, how we approach solutions, how we approach each other, and then some of the ways that we maybe do that aren't helping the other person. So even like changing our own behaviors or how we start sentences or how we ask questions so that we're approaching the other person in a way that is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Nope. I got nothing.
All right. Well, so while you're coming up with your amazing word, the one thing I'll say though is that, so we're talking about a lot of the benefits, but it's not without work. And you guys know Ariana's the emotional one. So every session, you know, there was emotion.
I steal all of her tissues.
But I'm going to be honest. The last session we went to, I got emotional. And it's because this is really important. And we were getting into some deep stuff. Like we were really uncovering, you know, what our fears were. And, you know, part of it was also then seeing like what we're going to be able to do coming out of this. But I'll tell you guys, anything you do to truly improve yourself is going to, you know, basically be more difficult before it gets easier.
Yeah. So be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think that's why having a third party person to help guide you through that is so critical. I mean, we do the same thing with people in businesses. Like the first time you try to start a business or the first time you try to do a sales call, it is scary and you're going to learn a lot about like where you're comfortable, where you're not, but having somebody to kind of guide you through that and helping you to go through the tough times to ultimately have the result at the end is so beneficial.
Yeah. And some of the other benefits are just, I forget who talked about it. We talked about it on one of the episodes, but learning to lean, I think it was Marley and Wayne, learning to lead towards each other in times of conflict or issues instead of away. A lot of people will tend to, you know, like you tend to avoid your spouse when you're upset or when you have big things going on in your life, you're kind of in your own, you've got the blinders on. Instead, we've learned some techniques to lean toward each other so that we're actually helping each other get through that tough time because we're stronger together than we are apart.
Oh, way stronger.
But
like
sometimes
1 + 1 = 20.
Sometimes when you are in conflict, you don't want to work with that person to make things better. You want to like have a little resentment.
Well, you know, here's the struggle I had. I'll be completely honest. We would get to a point where we would get stuck and I felt like I couldn't move past or get us past that. And it wasn't until we figured out the fear thing and how we both approached that and then got some tools for help that it's so much easier to lean in and support each other now because we understand what that sticking point is and how to work past it. Before, even when we would try to kind of work together on it, we would just get to that point where we were stuck and we would both get so frustrated that we couldn't have any good conversation beyond that. So, I mean, like I always say, like find the one good takeaway or the one gold nugget and it's worth everything. That was the biggest thing for us.
Yeah.
You know, and you guys probably have something like that. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's something else.
I think too, like the, just learning some of the healthier ways to resolve conflicts when they happen and to communicate more productively because because we're so different, we often fall back into our old communication styles instead of remembering the other person's. And I think, having that person there to remind you, how are you asking the questions, or how are you coming at your loved one when you have an issue, that can change the game of the end of that conversation. So learning some of those techniques has been really helpful. Less blaming and more understanding. It's very easy, and I still get caught in this sometimes, like in my head, where something happens and you immediately look for the blame. Who's to blame? Who's to blame? Now it's more looking for understanding of the whole situation as a big picture.
Yeah, well, I would actually frame it. I mean, it's probably, once again, you guys see some of the differences between us. I think for me, it was less blaming and more frustration. And I think a lot of that frustration was to myself, not like, basically because I am the problem solver. And when we'd face a problem and I couldn't help resolve it, I would get so frustrated. It's like, why can't I do this? And so where it might have came out as like frustration at you or blaming you, it absolutely wasn't. It was me being frustrated with myself. But now that we've got some of those tools and we have that better understanding, now I think there's a lot less frustration, like on my part.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's more when when one thing happens and it's like, that person could have just done what they were supposed to do. And then you kind of go down this one bad thing happened and then all these other bad things happened, and it was a ripple effect. It actually can go the other way, and you have to kind of reframe how you're thinking about things, because I'll often get very upset, emotional person. And in my head, I'm going through all these things like, and then this, and then that, and then this. And I stop myself and really think like, okay, let's put myself in the other person's shoes or in somebody else's shoes looking at this situation. And oftentimes there's nobody to blame. It's just a frustration. And instead of just dealing with the frustration and having that internally myself and be okay with it, it's easier to put that onto somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what you guys are probably hearing as you listen to this, even though we went together and there was a lot of stuff, we each had to get clarity and learn and really focus on ourselves and how we're viewing things and how we're showing up to then be able to be stronger together. And I think that's probably one of the coolest things, is that we both have improved so much personally. And then when you combine that with our relationship and improving that, it's like just wins all around.
All right. So obviously, we love couples therapy. We love our therapist in particular.
Well, and by the way, I think that's a huge thing. Like, you got to find the right person for you. And it's the same thing if you're going to hire a business coach or anybody else. But if you get the wrong person, like, because we're talking about deep stuff here, right? So you got to be able to be open and to trust. And so, finding that right person for you is so
both
key
of you.
For both of you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be completely 100% honest here. Counseling might not work for everyone. And, there's a lot of people that are on each side of the fence out there that'll tell you counseling is the best thing ever and you should be doing it. And counseling will never work and you shouldn't waste your money and your time. Obviously, there's some caveats to that. One of as I was kind of just looking around and doing some research before we shot this episode, there was a quote that I got off of an article from the Gottman site, which is Dr. John Gottman. He wrote the book we're going to recommend today. We've talked about him before. And it was, the effectiveness of marriage counseling is directly related to the motivation level of both partners and timing. So let's talk about that a little bit, because we talked about, having the right therapist. That's huge. You have to have somebody who understands each of you and then also clicks with you. Like, if you don't feel like that person understands you, if you don't feel a connection, you're probably not going to come out of the counseling with a good feeling or with any kind of productivity.
Well, and here's the thing. What happens often, and we've talked about this in the past, one person has an epiphany or one person decides they want something and they immediately just try to go and pull the other person and make them do it. Oftentimes with like therapy, that's the case. One person's like, oh, this would be great. Like, my friend told me about it. They've had a really good time. Or I listened to this podcast with Tom and Ariana and they said how good it was. That's great, but you've got to help the other person kind of figure out what makes sense for them,
Mhm.
because if you're gung-ho about this and you're trying to drag your spouse and they want nothing to do with it, or they've got stories in their head about what it means to go to a marriage counselor, even if you get the right person, even if, the other stuff's in place, they're not going to be open and productive, and there's probably going to be more resentment. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of it comes down to,
Are both of you ready and willing to try that? And are you both willing to do the work as well?
well, and I think even before you get to trying it, aligning on what it is you're trying to achieve. Like, we always go back to alignment. And if you don't know like why you're trying to do something, why you want to improve this, it's going to be then hard, because first you figure out why you want to do it. Then you figure out how, and how might be with a counselor, it might be something else. But if you're not first aligned on like why you want to do it, it's going to be a challenging road to kind of make it work.
Yeah. And while we're talking about this particular topic, if you are somebody who is looking to improve your relationship and you've mentioned marriage counseling or couples therapy to your spouse and they're just not on board with it, we actually had an episode, the last episode that came out, show 84, with Stacy and Paul Martino from Relationship Development. And they actually take a different approach to relationship improvement, and that is with one spouse. They don't do couples therapy. So if you're somebody where you're gung-ho about improving your relationship with your spouse and they want nothing to do with marriage therapy or counseling of any sort, that might be something for you to look into, because they do all of the work through one partner to improve the relationship. And they've had a ton of success with it. They work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and they've said it multiple times, one person will come in from the couple, and then like months later, as they've changed and become the person that they're meant to be, the other couple will want to come in and do that same training. They don't do it together, but they can go through the program each as a spouse.
Yeah. Well, and like, I guess my kind of summary or biggest takeaway from this is, invest in this stuff when things are good and you want to make them great. Don't wait till things are terrible, because it's going to be so much more difficult. Like, I mean, it goes the same way. Like, we keep bringing this back to business, but like, don't seek out a business coach when
Things are falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, like, we watched the show The Prophet, Love Marcus Lemonis, and when people bring him in and they've only got enough money for like one more week to keep the business open and then they're going to shut, it takes drastic effort to turn that around. And a lot of times you're almost like too far gone, where either you're not going to be able to turn it around, or it's the cost of doing that is just so much more than if you would have been a little bit more preemptive or proactive. So it's the same thing like with your marriage. If you're waiting until things are like at the very end, one, it might be too late. And two, if it's not, it's going to take so much more work to kind of get it back and get those results you're looking for. Compared to if things are good, but maybe you're experiencing some challenges and you want to make them great, you're going to get so much out so much faster, because things aren't terrible and you're kind of building off that foundation you have.
Yeah. And on that note, our friend, Dr. John Gottman, not really our friend, but we like him a lot. He actually put out a statistic. According to Dr. John Gottman, couples wait an average of 6 years of being unhappy before they reach out and try to get help. So this is why a lot of those statistics on how successful marriage therapy and couples therapy is look so horrible. It's because people are waiting 6 years of being unhappy before they're looking to improve their relationship. Obviously, the odds are against them at that point. So don't wait 6 years.
Well, I mean, it's like having a broken arm and being like, oh, I'm not going to go to the hospital. And then you wait like 6 weeks until it heals like wrong. And then you're like, well, now I'm going to go to the hospital.
No, they got to re-break
usually they got to like break the arm and make it a lot more painful to then help it heal correctly.
Really gory analogy.
But I mean, it's spot on, because that's a lot of times what happens is the longer you wait, the more you get into these bad cycles and bad habits. And then you have to basically go and undo a lot of that to then like kind of make things work right.
Yeah. All right. So actions coming out of here. That's my action. Don't wait until your relationship is in trouble, in quotes. Go and invest in the book we're going to recommend to you, or go and seek out some help to improve things. Go on a marriage retreat. Do something to actively work towards improving your relationship.
Yeah, and I'm going to say before, maybe not before, but focus on yourself first. Like a lot of people go to a marriage counselor and they're like blaming their spouse. And all of this starts with you. So whether you do individual like support with, Paul and Stacy, or whether you do couple stuff, it all starts with you. And if you go in kind of blaming your partner or trying to change them, it's not going to work. So start with you. Look in the mirror and really understand and focus on improving yourself. So then you can focus on improving, your relationship.
And if you are somebody who's looking to have some talks with your spouse about what your future looks like, what your life looks like, go and check out our Plan with Purpose download. That will walk you through the whole first section. Actually walks you through talking about what you want your life to look like, going through the vision board exercise, talking about your life goals, and kind of like what your ideal every day would look like. So that's a great exercise to go through with your spouse to kind of start these conversations about, hey, what do we want our lives to look like?
And this is absolutely free. We put it out there for free because this is the foundation for not only your life, but if you want to build a business, getting aligned on that.
Yep.
So highly recommend checking that out because alignment is really the first piece. And if you can understand why you guys want to do things and what you're going after, then it makes it so much easier to figure out how you're going to get there.
Yep. And you can find the link to that at the show notes page, which is going to be tomandariana.com/85.
Okay.
All right.
So
what's the book?
We've mentioned this book and this person multiple times. So it's the 7 principles of making, the 7 principles for making marriage work. The practical guide from the country's foremost relationship expert. Now, we hadn't heard about this Gottman or the book for a long time.
Ago.
And then, actually Alexi and Preston, you guys probably heard their episode previously. They brought it up. We started reading it and then we brought it up to our counselor. And she's like, yeah, that's like the definitive work. That's the only like credible stuff. She was actually going to get certified, with them. But this book is pretty incredible. They've studied relationships for like 40 years and like as you go through the book, you'll kind of figure out why it makes so much sense, but it helps you just understand like the common principles that make a marriage work versus not, and just some key actions you can start taking to ultimately make things better. So it's not like so clinical where it's like, oh, the studies and blah, blah, blah. There's a little bit of that, but it's also but it's also not like, oh, well, this is what worked for us, so it's going to work for you. It's like, no, this has been spanned across so many couples and their success rate.
Case studies right in the stories, which I love.
Well, their success rate for like predicting success of a marriage is like 93%. Like that's crazy. So if you do want to improve your marriage, like this is the book to get.
It's got some great exercises that you can start going through with your spouse right away. And I think they have a workbook too, which it's not on Amazon, but they have a workbook on their website. All right. It has been another amazing episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and lifestyle builders.
And as always, remember, it's your life, your business, your way. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you know another entrepreneur who may benefit from hearing this show, we would so appreciate you being a good friend and sharing it with them. Are you dreaming of a life of financial freedom and more time to spend with your loved ones? Want to build your business to support that dream? You need Lifestyle Builders, a mentorship program designed to meet you where you are and give you strategic and custom guidance so you can build the business you need for the life you crave. Become a lifestyle builder at joinlifestylebuilders.com. Are you a Lifestyle Builders podcast fan? We'd love to hear from you. Head on over to tomandariana.com/iTunes and leave us a review.